as we say in College Station, howdy. All right, we're in Texas, and it's so great to be back here. All right, we're going to get my charts up here. While we're doing that, I am John Sherman. I am Dean of the Bush School, and I'm so proud to be in this position. TJ, thank you for the very wonderful introduction there, and we have known each other since second grade in Northwest Houston at an elementary that doesn't exist anymore. I think they moved it up near Jones Road and 249, for those of you that are from around here. So I'm going to talk a little bit this evening about public service, national security, and what our role in public service is. Now, TJ did a perfect job teeing things up, so I'm not going to belabor this. And the only reason I note this, particularly for our young professionals here, is we talk about being lifelong learners. And I think in the public sector, private sector, anywhere, you need to be ready when opportunity comes along and be prepared. As TJ said, and as you see up here, I graduated from Texas A&M in 1992, a distinguished military graduate, shortly after Desert Storm, after Saddam was ejected from Kuwait. I expected I was going to spend a career as an Army officer out there defending freedom in the deserts of Iraq or maybe in Germany or South Korea. And I did serve for a few years, but coming back to Texas A&M for a football game, I met an individual who said, "Did you ever think about working at the CIA?" And that had always interested me. And so I made a pivot on my career at that point, got my master's at University of Houston here and went into CIA, but I'd submitted an application to be an analyst. And then when I got my interview paperwork, it said, "No, you're going to be a photo interpreter," which was fine, what CIA did. And it was satellite imagery, taking pictures from outer space and also from aircraft, looking at Iraq and elsewhere, and I was pretty good at it. Found things in Iraq that had been missed over many years, helping our military forces avoid getting shot down by missiles, helping find communication nodes and things like that. I had a chance to work in the White House Situation Room under George W. Bush. You see my picture with him there. And just by happenstance, the team I was on was the one that was on duty on the morning of September 11th, 2001. A terribly tragic day in our nation's history, but also one that I saw our government, our leaders come together and stand up for what we needed to do. And I was honored to support President Bush, Vice President Cheney, Dr. Condoleezza Rice, and other national leaders at that time. And although I'd only been in the intelligence community for a few years, I got to see how our government rose to a challenge, which would help me all throughout my career. And then, as noted, I did many things. I managed at different levels in the intelligence community, but then I volunteered for some various task forces when cloud computing was coming online. We were using data in different ways. I came up with some ideas about how to use something differently in terms of getting data, the National Security Agency, and then I got a call from Senator Dan Coates, who President Trump had appointed to be the head of national intelligence, said, "John, I want you to come be the Chief Information Officer of the U.S. intelligence community." And I said, "Sir, I've never been a CIO." He said, "That's why I want you. You've been on the operator end. You know how to get big things done. You know how intelligence is used and the data and the IT and the computing and the cyber." And I did that for 3.5 years. And then I was called over to the Pentagon. And by the way, in that job, I was appointed by Donald Trump. And then in the next job, the Biden administration asked me to stay on and to run the DOD's information technology enterprise. And it's not only computers, folks. It's cybersecurity, it's satellites, it's GPS, it's the electromagnetic spectrum that your cell phones use, but also our radars use to keep this nation safe and our warfighters safe. And so throughout this, I had a little bit of a Forrest Gump thing going on. From that Army officer standing on that Bradley fighting vehicle at Fort Bliss, Texas in 1993 to working for President Bush, and then you see my photo on the upper right. But it was being a lifelong learner and being a public servant. And as TJ noted, walking alongside my wonderful wife, who was serving in some of the most dangerous places on this earth: Colombia, Haiti, Iraq, Afghanistan, Bosnia, Mauritania, and 9/11 being a pivot point for not only our country but our own family as we were doing what we needed to do to keep this country safe. So that's one takeaway, that I was able to adapt and be ready, as TJ said, but I didn't anticipate 30 years ago, if you would have said I was going to be running the largest IT enterprise in the world. And then the opportunity at the Bush School came open. Now, as a graduate of Texas A&M in 1992, I had a chance as an undergrad to see President Bush come to our campus twice. May 1989, seeing that blue and white Air Force One coming into Easterwood Airport. Right there, he spoke at commencement in 1989 in May. And then in 1992, he arrived in December, after he had lost the election against Bill Clinton. And standing in G. Raleigh Wright Auditorium, and Liz was covering this for the local newspaper, he said, "We need to support our new commander-in-chief, President Bill Clinton. He has won the election, and we need to support him." Liz wrote that in the story that was covered locally there, and I read it and went, my goodness, what a leader. And at the time, as an Aggie, getting ready to head to Fort Bliss, where those armored vehicles were for my training, we heard about right across the way from where Liz and I were living that they were going to be building this Bush School of Government Public Service and his presidential library. So fast forward 28 or so years, I'm wrapping up. I'd served in the Trump administration and the Biden administration. And as the previous chart said, I'm not a partisan guy. My job is to support this nation, not from a blue or red perspective, just get it done. But then when I heard this school was coming open, and I respect President George H.W. Bush so much, we're standing in his former congressional district right now. As a congressman from here in 1964, and before that a businessman with Zapata Oil, and all the way through all the other jobs he had held at the United Nations, head of the RNC, first envoy to when communist China was opened up, CIA director, vice president, and finally president. A man who held the highest ethical standards, did what's right for the country even when it was hard, led the largest coalition this world has ever seen to eject Saddam from Kuwait, and on and on. And then I heard the dean job was coming open to get the next generation ready to serve, and not only in government, but in public service. And there are so many different types of public service. There is in nonprofit management, there's local levels, etc., all the way through up to the federal and international level. So you may be asking, some of you may be familiar with this, but I'll give you a little overview here. So what's the Bush School all about? What is it? It was founded in 1997. That's when it was opened. President Bush had been out of office a little over 4 years. Now, people get it confused. There's the library and museum, and you see other presidential library and museums. George W. Bush's library and museum is up in Dallas. You've got the LBJ Library and Museum in Austin. The school is a separate building, separate entity. We're on the same complex there, but it is part of Texas A&M University. We have 3 degrees there, or 3 areas: international affairs, public service and administration, and very recently, political science, which moved over from another part of Texas A&M. Now, it started relatively small. We had maybe couple dozen or less students in that first class in 1999 when they graduated. And they were all graduate students getting a master's degree in public service and administration. And over years, the graduate programs grew, where it went from a few dozen to many dozen and so on. But then when we brought political science over, we got 1,400 undergrads, we got PhDs, and as well as now some master students from there too. Now we're up to about 2,000 students and about 140 faculty. Now, Texas A&M is 80,000 students. It's one of the largest universities in the country. So 2,000 doesn't sound that big, but we punch above our weight because of the sort of students and graduates we produce out of here. We're one of the top recruiting stops, for example, for CIA and FBI to get men and women into national security and other intelligence agencies. I'll tell you a quick story. The intelligence program there was started at President Bush's behest when he was alive in the late 90s, and a man named Jim Olson, a noted CIA leader who had served as chief of station at various key outposts to include Moscow, came and started the program. And over nearly 2 decades, under his leadership of the intelligence program at the Bush School, hundreds of graduates went off to CIA and elsewhere. And just this past year, he was invited to CIA ostensibly to give a briefing. And to his surprise, he came into a large room, and there were probably 300 people in there, graduates of the Bush School, that he had helped see through the program over the years who are now protecting this country. And that's what we're about at the Bush School. Now, we're not only about national level service. We have a robust city and county governance program. Drayton McClain, former owner of the Houston Astros, helps fund that. We have other folks getting that going. Mr. McClain, I don't think he'd mind me saying that. He's from Temple, Texas. He'll say that, you know, you look at this great state of Texas, 254 counties. The folks who raise their hand to be the county commissioner in some of the counties may be the smartest farmer or the folks working in the oil patch. And those are great Americans. But let's get them ready to do it. Let's make sure they can maybe get a degree and some training, and it's not only a graduate certificate, but maybe other types of degrees and training they can get, because the strength of this state is at the local and county level. So let's get folks ready to do that. We also have, at the bottom right there, you see what appears to be an office front. We now have a site in Washington, D.C. It's on L Street. We're about 3 blocks from the White House. So K Street, you know, people know about that from advertising and so on. We're right at the back side of that on L Street there. And if you walk right around the corner there, you can see the White House right there down the road there. And it's, we have 125 students full-time there. And these are men and women who are full-time working professionals already on Capitol Hill, the intelligence agencies, and so on. And they're mainly focusing on national security, intelligence, and foreign affairs there. But that's a key thing we have going on there. I talked about the wide range of degrees we have, and one thing I really want to foot stomp about why the Bush School is special is our mix of faculty. We have traditional tenure track faculty members, men and women who have grown up in academia, done dissertations, have worked their entire careers doing instruction and research. They're so wonderful to have. We also have what are called professors of practice. These are men and women who have served in CIA, FBI, the military, nonprofit management, city management, and so on, that have been in their jobs 30 plus years. Liz is a professor of practice at the Bush School. They come there and they also teach students in our graduate and undergraduate programs. And I'll tell you, it's not just sitting on the edge of the desk telling war stories, and there we were in Mauritania, and we had ISIS on the run. Liz was really doing that. There's some of that, but it's also real theory coupled with academics, coupled with real assignments. We do something pretty cool at the Bush School, and other schools do this too, called capstone assignments for graduates and undergraduates. Well, we'll find what is called a client, and it can be a military command, it can be one of the national labs like Sandia, it can be a local government like Midland, Texas, where we're working right now, and we'll have leaders at those institutions give us a real-world hard problem. Special Operations Command, that oversees all our commandos and Navy SEALs and Green Berets and all that, gave us a real problem. Hey, help us with the pivot to great power competition. And our students working economic statecraft vis-a-vis the PRC, People's Republic of China, worked on problems about economic conditions and warfare against China. And they went to U.S. Indo-Pacific Command, and we also had folks go to Special Operations Command to give briefings to their leaders there about how we're going to pivot from what we've been doing for the past 20 years, fighting terrorists in the desert, which still are an issue, make no doubt, but also to thwarting China's influence and designs on the Western Pacific, to interrupt democracy and what we're doing with our allies. And then also, I have our city and county governance lead out in Midland this past week. Laura and some other colleagues got to talk to him by video conference, and we're getting ready to help Midland, Texas do a little bit better at their request on how they're allocating their funds for roads, for schools, and so on. That's what the Bush School's about. The picture in the upper right hand there is me talking to our freshman convocation. Our classes are much smaller, but that's our freshman class last year. We have hundreds of freshmen there, and these are men and women who are growing up in the image of George H.W. Bush. And we, at every opportunity, and I was talking about it at that venue, talking about selfless service, patriotism, integrity, the things that George H.W. Bush stood for in a nonpartisan way, and the things that he did even when it was hard. The tax increase of 1990, which in his diary and to his friends, he said, when he did that, he said, I just lost the next election. And history proved that out. But one could argue, by what he did, and people have strong feelings on this, put the country on a vector for the budget surpluses that his successor, President Bill Clinton, who, by the way, became very close friends with President George H.W. Bush later in life. The budget surpluses we were able to enjoy in the late 90s. Those are hard decisions, and we make sure our students hear every bit about that, because our students now, those freshmen, they were born 6 years after 9/11. Let that sink in for a second. 6 years after 9/11. So when they see George H.W. Bush, it is on non-HD television footage. It is reading about him in a book. We have images of him around with he and Mrs. Bush. He's got his flight jacket on from the 1988 campaign. Images many in this room of a certain age will know well. But for our students, it's not about his picture. It's not about him meeting with Helmut Kohl, former German Chancellor, Brian Mulroney, the Canadian Prime Minister. It's not about that. It's about what he did as a leader. It's about the ethics and ethos and character he had. And that's what we do at the Bush School, along with the rigorous academics and learning about how to defend this country, to make sure this country runs well, and to make sure our fellow citizens are well served. So that's a little bit about the Bush School. All right, I want to talk a little bit about the current public service environment, because it's in the news a lot. Now, the picture to the right, you may recognize that individual. That's Secretary of Defense Bob Gates. He was the first dean of the Bush School from 1999 to 2001, after which time he became the Secretary of Defense in the George W. Bush administration. Now, Secretary Gates, I've got big shoes to fill in that job as dean, by the way. He had earlier served throughout multiple administrations and as CIA director under George H.W. Bush, but he's standing with some of our students there in front of our big flag mural we have at the Bush School. And I wanted to highlight this because those men and women standing around Secretary Gates, those are our future. Those are your future. These are the folks that are raising their hand to go to the State Department, to the hardest assignments. They're the ones volunteering to go to the CIA, not to the cushy jobs. They want to go to West Africa. They want to go to Peshawar. They want to go to Moscow. They're not going for the easy assignments. These are the men and women that want to take on the nonprofits, to help the most disadvantaged of our nation and the world, to go into the inner cities, to go into the rural areas. That's your future right there. It's going to make this country and the world better. They do see what's going on in the news. There is a lapse of an appropriation right now. That's a fancy way of saying a shutdown. We're into what, week 2 of this right now? Week 3 now? Thank you for that. We've lived it. We lived through the 2013 sequestration when Liz and I weren't getting paid. She was furloughed for part of it and I wasn't, so thank you for that correction on that. Our son-in-law is a Navy officer, and we hear they may get paid, they may not, here coming up on October 15th. The young men and women you see in that picture and countless others, they're watching this, and we're doing everything to keep their chin up and not lose faith in being a public servant. There are massive reductions in force at the federal level, mainly, but elsewhere too. Now, people of good faith and good patriotism can argue about the size of our government. I've got feelings on this. You can see what I say on LinkedIn about this, because we serve there, and I bet some of you may have as well. There's certainly efficiencies to be had. My personal opinion, I don't speak for the Bush School on this, you don't go after the probationary hires and the newbies, because they're the ones that are right coming in, raising their hands, saying, send me overseas. Send me to the hardest jobs. And those are the ones that got cut recently. Not the ones who maybe homesteaded, who maybe their usefulness may have not been around for a number of years. I'm going to get to this later, but if you have any influence up with your elected officials and others, don't cut the newbies. They are the ones that are going to go do the hardest jobs, and they're ready to step up. But our folks at the Bush School are watching what's going on there. And also, they're not bureaucrats. They're not deadweight. These are people dedicated to public service. But this is affecting the public service discussion right now. So I'm going to talk to you about this at the end of the presentation, but help me help us here and make sure those men and women in that picture don't lose faith. What we are telling them is opportunities may not look exactly like they used to. Now, I told you about those professors of practice at the Bush School. Some of them go all the way back to early in the Reagan administration, even before. I started my career, as noted, in the early 90s, in the post-Cold War cuts. When Liz and I got hired, CIA was getting hundreds of thousands of applications and only hiring dozens a year. So I count ourselves as lucky. Liz is smart. I'm lucky she got in smart. But we've been able to talk to our students and say things go up and down. So as Secretary Gates said, and I don't think he'd mind me quoting him on this, all right, so your offer of employment to CIA got pulled, go join the military for a few years. Go join the National Guard if you're physically and otherwise able. Maybe go work in the private sector for a few years. Go work for TJ. Go learn banking. Go learn technology. Go learn another language. And then, when hiring maybe starts again, you've got an opportunity. Now, this is not what the students want to hear, and maybe it's not the most efficient use for their talents, because I've got folks coming out of here that speak Mandarin, Farsi, Arabic. They've learned cyber. They've learned foreign policy. But you know what? If coming and working at one of your companies or working at Amergy or somewhere for a few years gets them even more experience, and when the State Department hiring does turn on fully again, maybe they'll be that much better of a diplomat. But we're telling our students how to adapt on this. I said this, and I put this in bold. None of us should let these folks lose faith. Being in the public service is not a sucker's game. It's not the career of last resort. This is what true public service should be, is where people go as their first job. Many, and I saw this at CIA so often, many of the folks we're aiming to hire with these advanced degrees, with cyber and cybersecurity and data capabilities, finance backgrounds, and so on, they could make 5 times as much in the private sector. But because of a parent or a grandparent, or maybe a sibling who served in Fallujah, or Helmand Province, or maybe that uncle who was a diplomat, and they would hear stories over Thanksgiving about that uncle or aunt's service in Kinshasa and helping out over there. They said, you know what, I'm going to hold off on making my truckload of money here. I'm going to go off and start as a GS-9, and I'm going to go to the CIA, and I'm going to go to Ecuador for a few years. I'm going to help stop the flow of drugs into the United States because a cousin of mine overdosed in Dayton, Ohio, and I'm going to stop this. But we cannot let those folks lose a faith and say, you know what, to hell with it. I'm going to Silicon Valley, and I'm going to work out there, and I'm going to make so much money, because you know what, they're going to be missing something in here, and that would be a tragedy if they're not able to serve. And then we talked about how our nation ebbs and flows between cuts and plus-ups. And it happens in a democracy. I mean, there are times, remember during President Clinton's term, I talked about in the 90s, reinventing government. Some of you might remember that term. There was a lot of public service cuts during that time. And then 9/11 happened. And then in the national security space, we were hiring thousands of people and also contractors to come on to help us thwart Al-Qaeda and other terrorist extremists bent on harming this country and our allies. I hope we don't have to have a tragedy like that ramps things up. And it can be a natural disaster like Katrina. It can be an earthquake. It can be any number of things. We're telling our students and graduates, be ready, because there may not be a job now, but we may need you in the future. There are many different types of public service beyond the government. So we talk about nonprofit management. We talk about city and county. Private sector, many of you are in business or have been in business. There are ways to serve your community. I'll tell you about my former boss, Dana Deasy. He had been the CIO at J.P. Morgan Chase, working for Jamie Dimon for several years there on Wall Street, running the information technology for one of the top banks in the country. He retired, never served in the military, and then Secretary of Defense Jim Mattis, asked him to come back to be CIO of the Defense Department as a give back to the country. He did. He came out of retirement. He didn't need the job, and he was my boss at DOD, and he's the one that brought me from the intelligence community to the Defense Department and said, John, I want you to be my successor. He was the best teacher I could ever have. I'm going to teach you how to be a CIO. And he goes back into retirement at the end of the first Trump administration. Fast forward to last October, he gets a call from a dear friend, and I don't think Dana would mind me saying this. This dear friend said, Dana, what is the one American company that's in trouble that cannot fail? Without missing a beat, he said Boeing. He said, well, guess what? There's a new CEO. They're cleaning out the C-suite. and they want you to come to Seattle for 2 years. He said yes. He dropped everything, and he and his wife, Carla, are now in Seattle. That's public service. He's not doing it for the money. He's doing just fine. But we instill that in our students because people equate sometimes public service and government, and it's so much more than that. So public service can be more. And then one thing I'm keeping a close eye on as dean, public service and everything is changing, such as with artificial intelligence. Liz's and my children are both in public service. Our grown son is a deputy district attorney in Colorado. Our daughter is a social worker in Virginia. And they both swore coming out of law school and masters of social work, we're not going to use any of this AI stuff. What the heck is that? They both use it every hour of every day now. When our daughter is going out to meet with clients, young people in crisis, she has a tough book with her. She, with her hands, scribbles notes. She keeps the sensitive personal information. It comes up with treatment plans, next appointment referrals, suggested next courses of action. She says, Dad, I can't live without this now. Our son, some of you I'm sure I'm talking to are attorneys in this room. But if you're not, go to a courtroom sometime. Our son's a prosecutor. Watch the prosecutor and defense. You know what they both have open all the time? A laptop. You know what they're doing? They're cross-checking each other's facts. Whereas if you watch the show Law and Order and Jack McCoy up there, and he's remembering that 1978 case, Smith versus Jones in Albany. Yeah, they still have to have the knowledge, but you better stay up with the AI and to make sure you know what you're using, the bona fides of the facts. But I'm just using those two examples there. But you think about everything we're doing now in national security, city and county government, you name it, AI is and will be changing everything. And it gets into a whole discussion with ethics and capabilities and the technology, that this is something at the Bush School we're certainly not going to miss out on. Now, Marianne asked me to talk just a minute about national security, and I know you've had speakers far more qualified than me on this, but I did spend a bit of time on this, and I just want to share some high-level thoughts as a guy that's both been in the room and been involved in a number of operations over the past 3 decades here. So, Ukraine, we see it in the news constantly, and it's almost become numbing. When you turn on whatever your news source is, you read about it online, the drone attacks, the suffering, the World War I almost type warfare. This is showing us what the future of war is like, because although they're fighting in trenches in places like Kherson and other places of eastern Ukraine, you're seeing drone technology. You're seeing the Ukrainians launch drones from thousands of miles away that crippled the Russian strategic bomber force. You're seeing cyber attacks. You're seeing GPS jamming. You're seeing what future warfare looks like. You're seeing tanks and fighting vehicles unable to be used because they get eliminated immediately. You're seeing technology being built in real time. The Ukrainians will tell you they have 300,000 people developing software on a daily basis to adapt and counter-adapt to what the Russians are doing. We ignore this at our peril. In the United States, we have a bad quality of fighting yesterday's war, and I wish the Department of Defense and all of our wonderful individuals there the best of luck on looking forward and not planning to fight what we did on the War on Terror or Desert Storm or any of these other conflicts, because it's not going to look like it did. And if you want to know what it's going to look like, Ukraine is giving us a bit of that. People's Republic of China is girding for war. Don't let anyone tell you differently. They're conducting operations off aircraft carriers just last week. They are constantly rehearsing around the island of Taiwan to blockade it or subdue it. They're using quote-unquote gray zone operations, and I noted that on the earlier bullet. Gray zone operations are deniable operations that are short of war. For the Russians, it's doing things like cutting undersea cables, doing things like bombing or having somebody bomb munitions plants, cyber attacks. The Chinese are doing that and more. If you watch 60 Minutes on Sunday, my friend Tim Hawk, the former NSA and Cybercom director, was talking about how the Chinese have embedded themselves in U.S. utilities, embedded themselves in small towns, in water purification plants, in electric grids, in hospitals. You know why they're doing it? It's not for intelligence gain. It's if we go to war against them, they're going to shut off the power here. They're going to shut off a hospital. They're going to shut off an oil pipeline. Do you all remember when the oil pipeline went down about 3 years ago along the East Coast and there were lines and lines and gas stations? This is a new type of warfare, and we better be ready. The Chinese make no bones about their intentions, about what Xi Jinping intends to do around the island of Taiwan and the South China Sea. Heck, they've claimed the entire South China Sea as their own, right up almost to the Philippine shoreline. We've got treaty obligations there with the Philippines, and we've got alliances to include with Japan and others. I hope we never have to fight the PRC. This would be one of the worst things we have to do. But make no doubt, they've got designs on that area, and we better be ready. The technological landscape is shifting quickly, more quickly than we can imagine. We've talked about some of the things, drones, cyber attacks, space. I know President Trump got a lot of grief about the stand-up of the United States Space Force. The uniforms look different and everything, but I, as CIO, oversaw part of their budget for satellite communications and GPS. And I can tell you, as a former consumer of their expertise, thank God we have a Space Force, because the first shot in the future war, whether it's kinetic, electromagnetic, or other, is going to probably happen in space. And it's going to affect what's going on your phone. It's going to affect your ability to get information around. It may affect the banking sector and God knows what else. So I'm glad we're operating there. But the state of the art is moving along so quickly. We can't operate as we have as a country with decades-long acquisition cycles, with it's taking us 10 years to build a single type of fighter plane. We must move much more quickly. And that gets to the defense industrial base. We're getting it updated. Ukraine was a wake-up call. We found we only had single factory lines on some type of missiles. We found out that we had a just-in-time supply strategy that was fine for the Cold War and the war on terror, but not for a conventional war against what we would call a peer competitor like China. But time's not on our side. We've got to keep moving on this. Alliances are critical. NATO is awakened, finally. Liz and I had a chance to hear the Polish Secretary of State, that's the Deputy Foreign Minister, talk at Texas A&M last fall. They are not messing around. Poland is going to a war economy footing this year. They're acquiring tanks, helicopters, Patriot missiles. They have been run over enough times by the Russians and the Nazis. They're not going to have it again. Look into their eye, and they are not messing around. Neither are the Finns, the Norwegians, the Danes, and even the Germans and others are waking up to the threat from the east. In the Pacific, you hear about AUKUS. That stands for UK, Australia, US, building submarines together to challenge the Chinese. You've got Japan and India working in the Quad with the US and Australia. You've got alliances across there. Our old foe, now out, somewhat allied, Vietnam, is even working with us. And of course, the Philippines and others. Alliances are critical. The one thing I always got a kick out of watching, when we would send what's called a freedom of navigation transit, where a U.S. ship would come between Taiwan and China. You know the one thing that would scare the Chinese even more? Having more ships there. A Japanese frigate, a Canadian frigate or destroyer, or another national ally, the UK, coming along with us. Because our alliances are our superpower, and that's the one thing the authoritarians don't have. Yes, Iran, China, North Korea, Russia, they may bond together and trade drone technology and missile technology, but if we bring the weight of the free world on this together, no one can stop us technologically or militarily. But we got to tend to them. And then I want to talk about these pictures I have over here. I say our experiences in World War II can guide us, but time is not on our side. So upper left picture, our daughter, the social worker married to the naval officer, took that picture. That's a U.S. Arleigh Burke-class destroyer heading out of Norfolk. If you're a fan of an old John Wayne movie from 1965, heading into harm's way. That ship's heading into harm's way, I bet. Heading out to Yemen or in the Mediterranean. That's today's Navy. Let's go back about 80 years. The picture on the lower left with the ships with the funny paint pattern, those are Essex-class aircraft carriers. That's a famous picture at the Ulithi Atoll in the Southwest Pacific, which was a staging area during the latter parts of World War II in the Pacific. And that picture is called Murderer's Row. For you baseball fans, The 1940s Yankees batting lineup was called Murderer's Row. And so with baseball being such a thing back then, that's what the sailors called that. Now those ships, what are about 5 or 6 of them there, those are state-of-the-art aircraft carriers. We were turning out dozens of those a year. We started the war with 4 of them in the Pacific: the Wasp, the Lexington, the Enterprise, and the Saratoga. When we fought Midway, we only had 3 of them because Saratoga was laid up in dry dock. We had nearly 90 carriers by the end of the war. We overwhelmed the Imperial Japanese Navy and our enemies there. Can we do it again? I'm not sure with our current shipyard capacity, with what we're dealing with, but we better get ready to operate, if not at that actual quantitative capacity, with that same level of drive. Now the upper right-hand picture is a little tough to see. That's Douglas MacArthur, our commander in the Pacific region, and he's at a place called Santo Tomas University. Now, most of you may know the Japanese overwhelmed our forces in the Philippines in 1942, captured over 10,000 U.S. soldiers and others. It resulted in the tragedy of the Bataan Death March, where thousands of soldiers were marched to prison camps and onto Japanese ships. Hundreds, over thousands of them died. Those that did not make the Bataan Death March were kept in prison camps like at Santo Tomas there. And there's a historian I really like named John McManus writing about the Pacific, and he writes about this scene. Just days before MacArthur liberated this university prison in 1945, the internees and prisoners there, and included many Western civilians, when they remember they were locked up in 1942. And in early 1945, so Admiral Halsey shows up with this fleet, and they start to see aircraft flying over them they've never seen before. Different types of aircraft that didn't exist in 1942. And then our forces show up with Sherman tanks. They're wearing new types of helmet. They're carrying machine guns that didn't exist in 1942. They kick the gate down, and they come in. The Japanese flee, and the prisoners there are overwhelmed by, like, my God, what have we missed? Look at this technology. Look at our soldiers, and look at them. Look at these airmen. Look at the others. And I hope we never ever have people locked up for 3 years. But the rate of technology and how quick that changed, the shock that our prisoners felt, my God, that's American ingenuity. We did things that they weren't even aware of in 1942 when they saw those different types of planes and when they saw the soldiers carrying different types of guns and new tanks. Are we ready to shock people in the future going forward? I sure hope so. So this brings me to my last point. What is your role in all this? I'm going to bring it back to public service beyond national security here. The upper right hand, that's me providing a diploma to one of my professor of practice's sons. That's Lieutenant Riley. He's at the basic school for the United States Marine Corps in Quantico right now. He's going to be a Marine pilot. I was honored to hand him his diploma in May. You know what those 2 flags are at the bottom? Does anyone know what they are? They're at the United States Marine Corps Museum in Quantico, Virginia. The one right in front of us here, that is the one, if you've ever seen Iwo Jima and so on, that was the first flag that went up. The one that didn't get all the attention. The one that the Secretary of Navy said, I want that back right now because that's going in the museum. And that second flag that's in tatters, that's the one our Marines put up that is on the statue in Arlington, Virginia, that's in that famous photograph. Those are the 2 flags, and they rarely have them out like that together. But I want you to know that's America. That's what we're capable of. So bring it back to public service. Here's where I need your help. We've talked about this. Continue the imperative of public service. Don't let our young people miss out on what this is. And again, it's not military only. It's not only intelligence. It can be working at a nonprofit. It can be working at a soup kitchen here in Houston. It can be working out down helping farmers, where I grew up in LaWard, Texas. It can be working overseas. And yes, it can be stopping extremists from flying airplanes into buildings. It can be keeping your family safe, not only from mortal peril, but from poverty, from pandemic, and other things like that. Here's why I need your help too, here in this great city of Houston. Provide these folks opportunities. You may get someone knocking on your door that says, hey, I've applied to the CIA, but it may take a couple years. They're working my clearance. It's going to be to your benefit and theirs. Give them an opportunity. Or maybe someone coming right out of public service said, I just served as a diplomat in Africa for the past several years. I know a lot about international banking. Hire them. This is going to continue to plow in and that virtuous cycle of innovation and spirit on this. And you know what? People that are coming behind them will see the effectiveness of what they're doing. Be an active member of the discussion on this. And by you all being here tonight, you're showing you are. Vote for whatever party you feel you want to vote on, to include in the primaries. Get in the discussion. Show what citizenship means. Don't let our young people lose faith on this. There's a lot of partisanship. There's social media. There's cable television. There's sniping back and forth. As we said, there's a shutdown going on right now. Don't let the youth and the folks coming up behind us give into the cynicism. Show them what we can be as citizens, and it starts with us. And then that final point here. Let's support one another. Because when it gets really bad, like it did right after 9/11, or we've been in challenges after Pearl Harbor and other things we've had to live through, no one cares if you're a Republican or Democrat or independent. And you know, when we've got soldiers or Marines or others out on the line, they don't care who they voted for. They're looking at that flag on their sleeve. And here in the civilian sector, we're Americans. We're Americans. And for any colleagues here that may be from other countries, welcome. Welcome. It's good to have you here. And we want to work with like-minded nations to preserve democracy, freedom of speech, freedom of religion, everything that makes us democracies and who we are. But we can't lose a faith on this. Remember those two flags, what they stand for. Remember that young man who I'm shaking hands with in his senior boots, who's in Quantico right now, probably crawling through the mud or practicing on leading a Marine formation into combat. He's doing it for you. He's doing it for you, not for medals, not for pay. He's doing it to keep us safe. And here's our best quote from President Bush. Public service is a noble calling, and we need men and women of character to believe that they can make a difference in their communities, their states, and the nation. And that's President Bush's statue right outside the Bush School. This is why I come to work every day and why Liz does too, because we need those people of character. Thank you so much for your time this evening. I'll welcome your questions. Thank you.